Welcome to the Texas Conflict Coach radio program. If you've ever experienced or engaged in destructive or unresolved conflict, then you know it leads to broken relationships, distrust, and damaging results. Our program will help you manage and resolve conflict effectively with strategies, valuable resources, and support. Since 2009, our radio program hosted guest experts from around the globe sharing their perspectives, experiences, and expertise while giving you food for thought. If you can't listen live, then download and listen to any of our 300-plus podcasts in our library at texasconflictcoach.com. So sit back, relax, or join the conversation every Tuesday evening, or tweet us at TXConflictCoach.
Well, folks, good evening. Welcome back. This is our final episode of our three-part series, When Pets, People, and Places Collide, with our guest experts Gary Norman and Debra Hamilton. In this series, we have already discussed how dispute resolution tools are used to manage the conflicts among people involving their animals in everyday situations. The very first episode was called Another Arrow in Your Dispute Resolution Quiver. We then introduced the kinds of conflict people with disabilities encounter when they bring their service or assistance animals to public places such as a hotel, restaurant, movie theater, or even a taxi. We will continue this conversation in part 2 of Fido and Kitty when public and private venues square off. Now, we do have our chat room open, and if you're listening by phone, you want to engage in the chat room, go to www.blogtalkradio.com/Texas-conflict-coach. You can listen online as well. Sometimes you might need to log off and log back in if you're not hearing it, but you can engage in the chat room there. And we also are running a Twitter feed tonight, and we're using the hashtag capital T, capital C for Texas Conflict Coach Radio. So that's hashtag TCC Radio. All right, so returning guests, Debra Hamilton and Gary Norman. Now, Debra is the principal of Hamilton Law and Mediation. She provides an alternative means of resolving conflict and disagreements between breeders, owners, and handlers, neighbors over barking dogs, divorcing couples, especially if they're arranging custody agreements, vets and their clients, tenant and management, etc. Her mediation practice provides a neutral ground in which to have the conversation you want to have while peacefully coexisting. She helps her clients be heard at the time of the conflict and in the future. She works with everyone who wants to further their passion in the care of pets while reducing their exposure to conflict and litigation. Her website is www.hamiltonlawandmediation.com. We'll announce that again later toward the end of the show. Our second returning guest is Gary Norman. He is an attorney licensed in Ohio, Maryland, and before the United States Supreme Court. Now, he seeks to leverage ADR, alternative dispute resolution tools, to resolve conflicts. And in his many adventures about town, where he's often the sole or even the first guide dog team in the room, meaning the mediation room or the meeting room, his able second guide dog pilot is present with them, reflecting the uniqueness of having a disability. Now, as a lawyer who specializes in the full range of ADR tools, including litigation when necessary, he believes that animals may play a leading role both at a mediation table and in the courtroom. When he is not doing all of this, he may be found caring for his 2 dogs, a retired and an active guide dog, or reading one of his myriad of books from the Library for the Blind. Gary Norman's article, Dispute Thy Neighbor, Hire a Mediator, was recently published in the Virginia Maryland Dog Magazine, and he can be found at www.gnormanlaw.com. Again, we'll give those announcements later on. So, again, welcome 2 of you back to the program.
Oh, thank you, Patty. It's great to be here.
Thank you. It's great to be back again, and I've been very honored to be part of the show.
Absolutely. You know, we've learned a lot, and not just about where animal conflicts come about in our everyday lives, but especially in the last show, too, we really increased our awareness about people with disabilities who use service or assistive animals, and we talked a little bit about the various laws that are involved, such as the ADA, for example. You mentioned that, Gary, and situations that occur. And so we're going to continue that discussion by talking about the conflicts that arise when service or assistance animals are used. And last episode, Gary, you shared a typical experience that you had when a taxi driver refused to let your guide dog Pilot enter the taxi, and you encourage listeners that if they see something, say something. I love that assignment that you gave folks, and we do these assignments each week, listeners. So you see something that you know is not right, that you feel, especially when you're seeing someone with using the assistive animal. See something, say something to assist the person dealing with those who might be ignorant about the ADA, for example. So why don't we pick up from there and say more about other types of conflicts that occur when public and private venues square off when it deals with service animals. So either one of you can begin.
Feel free, Deborah, just for a minute to do an introduction or something if you want to say something.
Well, for my purposes, I usually have disagreements around restaurants. I know Gary and I have spoken a great deal about restaurants and places where food is served and service animals or emotional support animals that come in, and the difficulties that the serving people have, the owner of the restaurant has, and the attending public have, because they just don't understand. So, Gary, I know you can take this a bit further. It really means a lot to have a conversation and in a way that's supportive.
Yes. Pilot is such a fan of bistros, so I'm happy to always talk about restaurants, taverns, and fine establishments, at which I have the great honor of having a Pilot and often my wife at my side. There are a range of conflicts that arise in terms of assistance dog or assistive animal access in the public as well as in the dwelling or private sphere. And I've unfortunately and fortunately been part of all of them. There's conflicts that arise in terms of restaurants, like Deborah said. There's conflicts that arise in terms of five-star hotels or even low-star hotels, and certainly also in airports where Pilot and I are often cycling through on our various adventures together as an active team. I think the point is how do we utilize the full range of ADR tools like mediation or like public policy facilitation we've mentioned throughout the show so far to really take the law that's on the books and make it a much more accessible and approachable kind of body of customs, laws, regulations, and policies that the public will both accept and then also comply with. To my mind, ADR, facilitation, mediation being tools in that toolbox are real key ways to bring the able-bodied and the disabled public together to talk about what it means to be a person with disability, which has many benefits, also has many challenges, and then also what it means to have an assistance dog present.
And it really begs the question that it gives the opportunity for people to have the conversation and in a less confrontational way learn about what it is they need to do to understand the uses of animals for service.
So I want to tap into something from our conversation last time when you were explaining, Gary, the example of the taxi, and you were saying, you yourself need to learn and practice. We all do, but in your situation, how not to be reactive when someone who's ignorant about the law, or maybe they're not ignorant, but they just don't care because of the fact that you have a guide dog. And so one of the things that came up that you talked briefly about is in the airport situation. So I could easily see where conflict can come up in the airport, which is considered, I think you said, a public venue. But when you get into the airline, the airplane itself, which is under a different, the air carrier, you could correct me because I'm sure I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. But when the service or assistance or guide dog in this case is on the plane and someone is engaging in a conflict around that, what immediately, because you're in a very tight, small space, can you say more about that?
So I think your question is really a non-ADR question, but nevertheless an important question because many people still don't know about all the ways that service animals help people with disabilities, including myself. When I'm on an airplane, which is a different kind of set of laws and setting, obviously, than when I'm at, say, McDonald's in BWI here in Baltimore, I have pilot at my feet. He's allowed in the cabin under the laws that govern people with disabilities being in airplanes with assistive animals or assistance dogs. And usually it's not a problem. I usually request and am able to request under that set of laws bulkhead or a bigger space on the floor so that Langer or pilot can be comfortable.
And so if you have you found yourself or known of people who found themselves in a conflict on the airplane because of their assistive dog, and how do listeners who are tuned in deal with that? And right now we're dealing with just the everyday kinds of things that people might find. We'll get into, if it escalates, how do we use ADR for that? But what would you say about that?
Well, I think Debra and I actually talked about this on the last show we did together, which is her own show, The Ultimate Pet Summit, which will be coming out with my appearance, I think, sometime next month or the month after. And we talked about what I've called with her a teachable moment, both in terms of the airline staff and also in terms of a specific guide dog handler. I won't mention his name for reasons of this show, but most people, I think, in the guide dog handling community and even most able-bodied people at this point will know because the story went global or viral even. Unfortunately, a guide dog handler in Philadelphia, I believe it was on an airline, unfortunately made the wait for an extended period of time, perhaps almost an hour and a half, and of course his guide dog became restless. So unfortunately the flight attendant on that airplane was evidently uneducated and unsympathetic to people with disabilities. So she rudely interacted with the guide dog handler. In turn, the guide dog handler was rude, abrasive, and aggressive and said various epithets to the flight attendant, causing himself to be arrested by the federal authorities, which is, the bad thing. And
right.
The fellow passengers on that flight, which was a very small commuter-type flight, also observed that basically it was a civil rights violation the way that the flight attendant interacted with this specific guide dog handler. So they actually also deboarded the plane when he was escorted off by the authorities. On both sides, there were serious problems. The flight attendant did not know the law and was not providing good customer service to any of the passengers, nevertheless, the guide dog handler. In turn, the guide dog handler was rude, aggressive, and at best impolite, if you will, losing its moral credibility, which I've learned as a leader with a disability when dealing with the public or just dealing with the public as a human being, nevertheless one with a disability. If you act like you're wrongdoer, then you lose your moral credibility, and ultimately you lose a teachable moment. You lose an opportunity to really break down the law from very rigid, cold books and paper to something that's feelable and understandable on a day-to-day basis by the average person, which is not always as educated on these topics as, say, Debra or myself.
And to just reiterate, the teachable moment is so important. And if you can take the time to have a conversation instead of getting angry, but when pets are involved, Gary and I have talked about this at length, it is an emotional thing, and it is almost impossible sometimes to hold your emotions in check if you see something happening to an animal, and sometimes that really exacerbates the issues.
Well, you're touching on another question that I have, which is, when things start to escalate, and I don't know if this escalated to the point requiring, obviously, the gentleman was, taken off and arrested, and I don't know where it went from there, but what are the types of disputes have you seen, each of you, involving people with disabilities and their service animals that escalate requiring outside intervention? And so say a little bit more about this level of escalation that meets, maybe it's legal attention, maybe hopefully it's ADR processes outside of litigation that are available. And we've talked about mediation and all of that, but I know at one point, Gary, you mentioned about the California's arbitration appeals process. So say a little bit more when things do escalate to that point.
I guess what you're asking is what ADR processes are available to these kinds of disputes. And just as many as there are disputes, there's also many different kinds of approaches to resolve them, both very formalistic type approaches, such as the Civil Rights Agency here in Maryland, for which I have the honor of having been a governor appointee and now serve on this board, which is a very legalistic complaint-driven process, to the federal level, which is also sometimes a very legalistic complaint-driven process, to less formal types of processes like we've mentioned, such as my facilitated forums, which I'll be doing in April this year, 2 in April actually, one at the University of Baltimore School of Law, where I'll be talking about the assistance dog handler myself as a patient with a disability and how we can build better communications with medical providers. I'm honored to be working with a mentor of mine and good friend, a former health secretary of Maryland in that program, and then the next program at the Marshall Fund, also in April, on international disability policy. Of course, always, because of Pilot being at my side, I always try to weave in the issues of animals and animal mediation.
Because, Patty, the bottom line is that Gary has done a beautiful job of creating conversation, and because he is impacted at every level, it makes it more human for people to look at as opposed to just talking about it esoterically. You're really seeing someone who is using a guide dog in a way that is necessary and coming up against the different discriminations and holding himself out as a leader in educating people in a gentle and respectful way so that they treat him in the same manner.
That's a beautiful comment, and I'm really a big bear. I can be an aggressive attorney, but I can also just, cry too at movies. So that really brings a tear to my eye, and that's a lot to live up to. So I hope I honor that, Deborah.
Thank you. Now, you had mentioned, let me tap back into this California. I guess it's rare maybe that they have some type of an arbitration appeal process regarding guide dogs.
I think the quick background on that is that California is one of few states to actually license guide dog trainers as an actual professional licensure. While all guide dog schools across the country share best practices, and there's an organization nationally to build a platform to make sure that the guide dog training is the highest among assistance dogs and the most uniform, California is the only state that I know of that really has a professional license as a guide dog trainer. By the same token, California, as I know, perhaps there's other states, is the only state where when you want to become a guide dog school, say Gary, Norm, Debra want to create a guide dog school, we actually have to submit a plan to the State Board of Guide Dogs to create that guide dog training institution. So you can imagine if you have all those processes and licensures in place, just like any other profession, any other professional organization like a law firm you want to create, conflicts will arise. Californians who are very ADR-oriented, including their great Pepperdine Law School down in Southern California, have said we should also try to apply an ADR approach, albeit the more legalistic arbitration approach to those kinds of conflicts.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's just another example. Do you believe, Debra and Gary, that communities, and I can already answer this first part of it, that communities should be encouraged, but should they be required to promote such ADR processes like mediation, these facilitated forums, the arbitration processes?
Well, for me, I always want to err on the side of using mediation before arbitration because you're leaving the solution in the hands of the parties, so they're more invested in trying to educate each other and respect each other, especially if they have a very good mediator who gives them the opportunity to really listen to each other so that you get a solution that they understand. With arbitration, you're really giving away the ability to make that decision for yourself, and whatever the arbitrator decides is what happens. If the conflict is very bad, maybe an arbitrator is the only way to do it. But I always err, and Gary and I have talked about this, I always err on the side of doing mediation first because it is so much more impactful if when the conflict arises, the parties are given the opportunity to learn from each other and figure things out than to have someone figure it out for them.
I think my response is perhaps less clear and concrete. There's benefits and challenges to both using the word required or using the word encouraged. If you require an ADR process like a mediation process, then you're bringing people to the table where they might not come to the table. That's the benefit. On the other hand, mediation is meant to be an organic, informal process, and if you require people to come to the table, then perhaps that really discourages them from actually coming to a settlement. On the other hand, if you encourage people, sometimes there needs to be more of the stick than the carrot to get them to the table.
Absolutely, and encourage is the word to use, not require. I apologize if I use require, because you cannot make anyone engage in mediation. So it is really a process where you have to choose to try to do this on your own. Courts do tend now to require mediation before you go to litigation. But it's been my experience that if it's required, people jump through the hoop and then they go to litigation because they don't really put a lot of value in really attending the mediation, but rather seeing it as an impediment to their desire to litigate. If they really engage, they can get the benefits of mediation, but if they're simply doing it because they're required to, then Gary is absolutely right. It is not as effective as it can be.
I would also note a takeaway. Title 28 of the Code of Federal Regulations, which governs ADA access, or Americans with Disabilities law, encourages the use of ADR tools in resolving disability access concerns.
Yes,
as well as does the Fair Housing Act.
Yes, and that's excellent to know that. I also appreciate, Debra, that you made the distinction again for our listening audience between mediation and arbitration, because so many people, just the other day someone called and said, "Oh, I see that you provide a conflict resolution or arbitration services." I was like, whoa, step back. Let's talk about that, because it's a completely different process, so thank you for making that clarification, because it is completely two different processes. So we're tuned in. Before we get back in here, let me just let listeners know who are just joining us. We have people in the chat room, in our studio, and in our Twitter feed. You are listening to the Texas Conflict Coach Blog Talk radio program. I'm talking with Debra Hamilton and Gary Norman. Interchange that. The returning guest for our three-part series, When Pets, People, and Places Collide. So we've just been talking and continuing our conversation. Gary, you were going to add something there.
I think I was agreeing with somebody.
Oh, you agree about the difference between arbitration and mediation, I know. Mediation. And yes. Don't worry, Patty, we are almost hooked at the hip, so you can call us Deborah Norman or Gary Hamilton. It's okay.
Gary Hamilton.
Absolutely true.
Now, I know, as passionate as we all are in our practices as ADR practitioners, as conflict management, conflict resolution, mediators, and you specialize in conflict involving animals, what would you recommend about how we continue to educate the public and increase the visibility of people with disabilities using assistive service animals? What else can we be doing?
Go ahead, Gary. You take the lead on this one.
There's so much responsibility, I think, always falls on everybody. So it's not enough to say that employer is not hiring enough people with disabilities. It's not enough to say that restaurant is denying pilot access. The guide dog handling community itself has to commit to finding ways to be more reflective, less reactive, to use these tools, which I'm trying to bring to the community to resolve their conflicts on the spot instead of turning it into an adversarial or a legalistic process, which is sometimes necessary, but at the final result is often taxing in time and treasure.
And for the able-bodied who are confronted with these issues and don't really know what it is they can do or should do or are required to do, either educating themselves by reading or asking the person in a nice way to just let them know what it is they need and working out a compromise in a lot of ways, because most of the time, Gary and I have spoken, that there's a way that everyone can enjoy the facility together with a guide dog or a service animal if you work together. And so if the a disabled person will, I guess, discuss it in a way that is not, as Gary has said, confrontational. I know it is very distressing that people don't know the law, but they don't, and you should educate yourself with the law. And if you're a restaurateur or you're a hotelier or anyone else, you should really not only educate yourself but educate your staff so that things are really put in place, procedures are put in place to respect everyone's sensibilities. And that way, if something arises, there's someone there who can take the heat out of the argument.
And there's just the notion that animals are such special creatures, and it's really a unique opportunity to have a dog like Pilot in the room, in the boardroom, in the marketplace. Our society would really benefit if we were truly much more, quote-unquote, pet-friendly than we are.
Something that, in through the conversation, especially for those who are ADR practitioners listening to these episodes, I think that practitioners, mediators in particular, who are going to mediate either these types of cases or they just happen to be mediating a conflict, let's say a divorce, which is a very common one that involves pets. But what I'm trying to say is ADR practitioners, if you're going to mediate a case that involves a person with a disability who's using a service animal, you have to be just as aware as that hotel person, that restaurateur, that taxi driver, you mediator, need to also be very aware of how to accommodate and ask and engage in that conversation with the person with a disability so that your mediation is most productive, whether that's a person with a guide dog or somebody else who brings in a pet therapy animal because they have, PTSD, whatever it might be aware of that yourself as a mediator. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add from that angle.
That is absolutely correct, Patty. Readers or listeners may consult Blind Justice on Access to Mediation, which I wrote, not to brand or market myself, but I think that's at least one resource, as well as is an article by, I believe it was Joan Cohen, who was at kind of the forefront of ADA-related mediation back when the ADA first came out. And was
Judy Cohen, you mean? Do you mean Judy Cohen?
Judy Cohen, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Judy Cohen, yes.
I'd love to add that it is also in everyone's best interest to understand that some people don't like dogs and don't like pets. And so in that kind of a situation, you have to respect those people as well. I had a conversation today with someone who is petrified of animals. And so for them, in a situation where they have somewhat of a disability because they cannot be in a room with a pet. So be cognizant of who is in your surroundings and respect everyone's ability.
Very good.
I think that's true. I think there's really gifted, talented people who don't like dogs, who have a legitimate disease and can't be around dogs, who say, wow, I understand that this is a special, unique relationship. And on the other hand, more frankly, there are people like that who are also jerks. And being able to distinguish among them is really something that all of us as guide dog handlers have to cultivate over time, and how you respond to that situation with different communications and different audiences effectively is also something that all of us need to develop over time.
Absolutely. Be mindful of where you're coming from so that you can make the best decision given the confrontation you might be involved with.
By the way, there are listeners who, especially those of you who are mediators, there are a number of articles, as Gary mentioned, from Judy Cohen and others in the ADA community who've written a number of mediation ADA-related articles, and you can just go to www.mediate.com and just type in ADA, and you'll see a number of ADA-related articles there. I want to just touch base very quickly with you, Gary, and then with you, Debra, because you have some resources. Gary, you recently wrote this article for the Virginia Maryland Dog. What is it highlighting for listeners? What do you want them to know about this important piece?
That I'm honored to be the legal columnist for that magazine, and in this specific article, I actually interviewed Debra and used her quotes quite extensively because she's such a master lawyer and mediator that I would be foolish not to do so. The high point is that as a lifelong historian at heart, I try to tap into a balance between talking about Lincoln and how he really viewed positively ADR, and then how we can bring that to the animal law community, to the animal world here in this region through a whole range of ADR tools such as mediation, facilitation, community conferencing, so forth, so on.
Is this article available at your website?
No, I don't believe it is, but it should be soon, I hope. If not, it should be on the Virginia, Maryland Dog Magazine website.
Okay, so they have a specific website with that. So that's the Virginia, Maryland Dog Magazine. And then for you, Debra, you have your second Ultimate Pet Resolution Summit coming up. Can you say a little bit more about this so that people can participate?
Well, it's starting February 18th, and thank you so much, Patty, because it is a group of people in the attorneys in the legal field, pet trainers, veterinarians, and human-animal bond behaviorists who have joined me to discuss different conflicts they've been involved with that would have benefited greatly by the use of ADR, or where ADR was employed, not formally but informally, and how it changed the difference and the tenor of the conflict they were confronted with. So it is, right now it's 10 sessions, and it starts February 18th, and it'll be on my website, www.hamiltonlawandmediation.com, and you can sign up. It's a free conference. It's called the Ultimate Pet Resolution Summit. It's the second one. The first one will be available for everyone who signs up for the second one, so you can listen to the first 6 interviews with such notable mediators as Layla Love and Jack Himmelstein.
That is wonderful. And in fact, that would be a great assignment, wouldn't it?
It would be, if they would like to sign up and listen to Jack expound on how to be a mindful mediator, as well as Layla talking about how to deal with conflicts in a horse barn, which was phenomenal. It really was on point and perfect.
Excellent. Okay, so as we close the program, we will do another assignment for the week, one that you just got from Debra on signing up, registering for the second Ultimate Pet Resolution Summit begins February 18th. And Gary, what additional assignment do you have for listeners today?
I encourage listeners to continue to say something if they see something in terms of access issues and access denials, and trying to bring these skills that we're teaching through this show and your wonderful platform to make those conversations much more effective. But more specifically for this week, I would encourage 2 different assignments for my able-bodied as well as disabled friends, somewhat differently, but also somewhat the same. For able-bodied folks, really try to find out ways to foster dialogue and to be part of dialogue with people with disabilities who use assistance dogs, so that you can hear their perspective and what it's like to have the blessing but also the challenge of the disability. On the other hand, for my guide dog handling friends out there, I would encourage them to be more reflective, less reactive, to be healthier and happier and less aggressive when we deal with conflicts and people who are saying don't bring that dog into here, which as a person with a disability myself, I know in the past I've not always done as good as I could have in those on-the-moment situations. But I hope as an attorney and as a person with a disability, I'm evolving to bring these ADR skills of mine to bear so that they are more reflective conversations and ultimately result in much better understanding in the public about great dogs like Pilot or my former dog Langer.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So again, folks, you can find all of the information that we've been talking about, a number of web links, etc., at the TexasConflictCoach.com on all 3 of the show pages that we put together on this series. You'll also, again, find the specific websites, HamiltonLawAndMediation.com and GNormanLaw.com. Debra and Gary, what final message on this final 3-part series would you like to leave with listeners?
Well, for me, I would like to let every pet owner understand there is a better way to resolve a conflict that may involve your beloved pet. And for people who are at odds with someone over their pet, please try to engage in alternative dispute resolution first, because you'll save your relationship, you'll save time, and you'll save a boatload of money. And isn't the relationship the most important part between people involving animals?
For me, I grew up with my Slovak mom, and I also grew up with the institution called the City Club of Cleveland, both of which use food and liveliness and big-spirited human beings to bring people together to talk about conflicts, and I think we can all do that together through my forums or this platform to talk about access denials and how we bring much more effective conversations on what it means to be a disabled person with equal rights to living, learning, and earning in the world. And hopefully, if you're lucky enough to do that with a great dog like Pilot.
It's all about the respectful conversation, Patty.
Absolutely. You know, thank you so much for kicking off our new year, 2014, with educating and raising awareness to our listeners in this really interesting area of conflict. And y'all just have been so outstanding in this series, and I can't say enough words how grateful I am to you and for this program and doing that. Thank you for your expertise, and thank you for your giving so generously.
Well, thank you, Patty.
Like I said, this is a very professionally produced program, very impressive, and I wish you many, many years of success with this platform as we teach the public as well as our fellow colleagues in the legal community about ADR and how they should incorporate that into their practice.
You are a blessing to all of us, Patty.
Well, y'all, thank y'all so much, and we'll end our show now, and we'll be talking in the near future. Thank you for listening to the Texas Conflict Coach. We hope you enjoyed the program. You can find all of our podcasts archived to listen at your convenience at texasconflictcoach.com or download the podcast at iTunes or Stitcher Radio. You can also become a Facebook fan of Conflict Connections or Twitter me at TXConflictCoach.
Thank you for listening to the Texas Conflict Coach. We hope you've enjoyed the program. You can find over 300 podcasts archived to listen at your own convenience at texasconflictcoach.com or download the podcast at iTunes or Stitcher Radio. To learn about upcoming radio programs and resources, sign up for our monthly e-newsletter.